As an upstanding member of society here in Japan, I was gobsmacked when I started making a list of the interactions I've had with police in my 23 years here. And these are just the ones I remember. So I've organised these into 7 sections. Traffic offences, traffic accidents, serious incidents, being investigated, unwarranted interactions, and random incidents. There's also a few things that happened to my family that I wasn't directly involved with that I just included at the end. So the first section, traffic offences. Now most people, according to research I've seen, think that they are better than average drivers. I am under no such illusions on that front. So I was given a car in my second year in Japan. I used to teach English to this woman and she just gave me her car, which was incredibly kind of her. And so my first traffic offence in Japan was a parking ticket. So I was staying with a friend near the Kencho in Sendai, and there's a street there that has parking meters. And there's an incredibly confusing sign that says between the hours of 8 in the morning and 9 at night, please use the parking meters. Now in the UK, that means that outside of those hours, you can park there for free. Apparently in Japan, it is obvious that outside of those hours, you're not allowed to park there. So when I parked my car there overnight, I came back and I had one of those yellow things clamped to the mirror. Didn't really know what to do with it, but I went to the nearest police station and paid my fine. The next one was I got a speeding ticket in Akita. So I went on a little road trip with my wife up north, and there was this long road, you know, these long rural roads with nothing. There was absolutely nothing in sight on this road. Everyone was driving at, 60, 70 kilometers an hour, and so was I. And we went over a hill and down this long slope, and there was a police speed trap there. And I was incredibly unlucky because basically it was like reeling fish in a barrel. Basically they pulled me in just as they let the last sucker go. Pulled in, had a 10-minute chat with them and got fined. The thing that killed me was while I was talking to them, loads of people were going past at 80, 90 kilometers an hour, but they didn't catch them because they were busy processing us. It was basically some kind of quota filling exercise where they just set up on this random road and just, fine a bunch of tourists. So, next one was I was meeting a friend in Sendai and I was late, so I called him stupidly and there was some police standing around the road and they pulled me over and fined me for using my phone while driving. And yeah, that was completely my bad and it's not something that I do normally. The next one was I had a conference in Niigata. I had to give a workshop for a bunch of teachers from the Niigata Board of Education. So I drove over there in the morning, did the workshop, went to Starbucks. There's a drive-through, which I hadn't seen in Japan before. Got a really big caffeine-laden coffee and drove back. Now the problem with this is that stretch of highway has sections where it's just one lane and the one lane sections have a much reduced speed limit, and I didn't really notice this. So I came back and I was doing 120, which for me is kind of normal highway driving here in Japan. It's empty road completely. And there was a speed camera. So a few weeks later, I got a letter saying that I had to go to the prosecutor's office because in Japan, speeding tickets are just an administrative thing. You get a ticket, you pay the fine, unless you dispute it. But if you're going over a certain speed, it then becomes a criminal offence and you actually have to go and be interviewed by the prosecutor. So that's what I did. I went into the Sendai prosecutor's office, had an interview, was very apologetic, put my suit on, all that stuff. And I ended up having to pay a fine of about 100,000 yen and my license was cancelled and I had to do a 1-day kind of course in order to get my license back. And so I did that, of course. I was actually doing 125 in an 80 limit zone. So I was 45 kilometers over, which is pretty serious here in Japan. Now, my last traffic offence, I'm actually a bit annoyed about because I was on a motorbike this time and I was driving along the Route 4 bypass in Sendai. And I was in the right-hand lane because I needed to turn right about 1 kilometer down the road. And as I was driving along, this car came up behind me really fast and started kind of tailgating. So I sped up a bit, and then they pulled on their lights. It was an unmarked police car, and basically they pushed me into driving faster, at which point they pulled me over for speeding. I was doing like 12 over or something. So it's just unbelievable. I was so annoyed with them. But of course, I paid my fine, and that was the end of that. And yes, I'm a pretty terrible driver, but I'm on my second gold license. All right, next category, traffic accidents. So my first traffic accident in Japan was I was riding on my bicycle and this car pulled out suddenly and hit me. And I ended up on the bonnet of the car. I kind of sprawled. The elderly couple driving were incredibly surprised and really apologetic. And I didn't really know how things worked at that point. I just got to Japan the year before. So I kind of checked myself. I felt fine. My bicycle was fine. They were fine. I was like, yeah, that's cool. Don't worry about it. And left. And this is not the correct thing to do in Japan. It was fine. It turned out perfectly okay. But anytime you have an accident in Japan, no matter how minor, no matter how trivial it might seem, it's really important to call the police and have them come and record everything just to protect yourself from being accused of leaving the scene of an accident. It's very serious in Japan. From insurance complications. Basically, the police report is what the insurance companies use to make their decisions with. And of course, the other party might end up, making up a story about what happened, and you can't really come back because you didn't have the police check the scene. My second traffic accident in Japan, I was driving to work. I had a part-time job in the evening, and I was incredibly tired. It was winter, car heater was on, hot car. Stopped traffic, so it was really busy traffic, and I fell asleep. My foot came off the brake and my car rolled into the car in front at like 5 kilometers an hour. Bump! It bumped. I woke up. I was like, oh shit. Called the police. The guys in the car in front were not Japanese. I'm not sure where they were from, South Asia somewhere. And the police came, did a report, and then about a week later, the police said, oh yeah, the other party is pressing charges because it was an accident that involved a human getting hurt. It's a jinshin jiko, so an accident with an injury, which then becomes a criminal offense. And I was like, oh shit. So I talked to the police, I talked to the insurance company, and then I went and talked to the guy that had made that report, and he was under the impression that he needed to file that with the police in order to get an insurance payout, and that's actually not true in Japan. So the police procedure and the insurance procedure are separate, and so I talked to the guy and I managed to convince him to withdraw the police report so that he was no longer pressing charges for the accident, but he was just dealing with my insurance company. If he had pressed charges, I might have had a fine, I'd have had points on my license, and it would have been really annoying. By withdrawing it, that went away, and the insurance company just paid him. Because it was my fault, his car was stationary and I hit him, it was entirely my fault. My insurance company paid for everything. And the two guys in the car really knew how to milk the system. I think they had hospital visits for about 6 months. And every time you go to hospital, you get a payment from the insurance. And then finally, the insurance company gave them a lump sum to go away. I think it cost something like 2 million yen, the entire accident. So damage to their car and medical expenses for both of them. About 2 million yen from my insurance company. My car suffered, I think, something like 3,000 yen's worth of damage. The bumper was a bit dented, and our normal mechanic kind of banged it out for 3,000 yen. So there you go. Having full third-party cover car insurance is essential in Japan. If you drive, whatever you drive, whenever you drive, make sure that you have unlimited third-party cover for damage to property and damage to people, because the consequences of being uninsured and having an accident could be life-changing. Same for bicycles. Bicycle insurance is incredibly cheap and is mandatory in most of Japan. So if you ride a bicycle, make sure you have bicycle insurance. We'll have a link to that in the description. When I first started driving in the winter, I went to Yamagata-Zao, which is a famous ski resort near here. And driving back, I hit some ice on the road and ended up doing 2 360s and crashing into a guardrail. And luckily there was no other vehicles nearby, so I didn't hit anyone else. But I did crash into the guardrail, and I think I should have reported that, but I didn't. I just went home instead. So that was a long, long time ago, and I didn't know better at the time. My next traffic accident was in Sendai. I was driving into town, and I had to turn left, and there was a queue for the traffic light. People were crossing, so we couldn't turn left yet. And this truck just clipped me from behind and stopped, and then we worked it out, and their insurance company, the report was funny because I had to fill out a report, and I said, you know, I was waiting to turn left and the truck hit me, and they were like, why didn't you just go? And I was like, well, there were people crossing. But yeah, that was fine. So their insurance company covered everything, and that was fine. And my last traffic accident in Japan was, again, I was driving to part-time work at night. I used to do lots of part-time work, a bit less now. And I pulled out into the turning lane. So I moved to the right into the turning lane, and another car like clipped me. So they were already in the turning lane, so I was at fault. I didn't check properly. They were going a bit fast. I pulled out, they clipped me, and they ran away. So it was a kind of hit and run, even though I think it was my fault, and I was perfectly willing to accept that. So I kind of pulled over and looked for them, but they'd gone. So I was like, huh. And I wasn't sure what to do in that situation, but I thought, you know, just to be safe, I'm going to call the police and tell them. So I called the police, and they came. And I said, you know, this happened. And they said, okay, let's show us your driving license and your Zairyu card. And I was like, okay, sure. And I was like, oh no, like I'd forgotten my wallet. The one time I'd forgotten my wallet. So I always have my driving license and my Zairyu card on me. You need the driving license to drive, and you need the Zairyu card to exist in Japan. So both of those are mandatory. I had neither. So I was like, oh shit. So I told the police, and there's actually a fine for not having your driving license. I think it's a 2,000 yen fine. It's very minor for driving without carrying your license. Driving without having a license is very serious, but not having your license on you is a small fine. And the Zairyu card, potentially, so on paper, the Zairyu, not carrying your Zairyu card on you day to day, you can be fined, I think, up to 200,000 yen on paper. My understanding is that no one has ever been fined for not having their Zairyu card on you, but the police will detain you. They might detain you in a station and wait for someone to bring the card. They might just take you home to check the card. So that's the worst case scenario. In this case, they were great. They said, yeah, that's okay. Just bring your documents to the police box in the next 2 days. And that's what I did. I went there the next day, showed them my stuff, got it sorted out. Ended up self-paying for the accident because in Japan, this is quite useful actually. So if you have a car accident and there's damage and you're not sure if you want to use the insurance or not, you can actually ask the insurance how much your insurance premiums will go up. And then once you have that number, and then you can figure out how much the damage costs, you can compare them and decide whether you want to use the insurance or not use the insurance. But you need to call them anyway because they will deal with the other party and they can figure out all this stuff. So you can make that decision. Next section is serious incidents. So there's a few times when we've had to call the police in a serious situation. The first one is we had a business stalker. So my wife has a small business here in Sendai, and out of the blue, this woman started calling the business on the business phone line over and over and over again, and she didn't block her number because she's not very bright, and very angry, very accusatory. basically being angry with my wife. We had no idea what was going on because we didn't know who this person was. It turns out this woman was having an affair with one of my wife's relatives, and she'd got my wife's contact information from that person, had been dumped by the relative, and therefore for some reason decided to take it out on my wife. It was weird. I ended up calling the police in Sendai and explaining what was going on, and this actually worked really well. So they traced the call, they contacted the woman's closest police station, they went and took her in and cautioned her, and she stopped calling. So that worked really, really well. I was very impressed with how smooth that process was. Within a couple of days, it was sorted out. Before we moved to our current mansion, we used to live in a big house. We rented this big house in Sendai. It was enormous. It was like 100 tsubo of house, if you know what that means. It was like this 3-floor enormous house, basically, big concrete thing. And one of the neighbors was kind of antisocial. You know, this kind of guys that live alone. So this guy, he's probably about 40, lived by himself in this small, cheap apartment, had a really big, expensive car, never went anywhere. So he didn't ever leave, you know, he wasn't going home for holidays or anything. No one ever visited him, total kind of exclusion. And we got off on the wrong foot because I used to have a Skyline GTS that had been modified for racing. I didn't race it, I bought it off someone. And it had a really loud muffler, really loud exhaust. So after a week or so, he complained about the exhaust. And I said, okay, that's fair. So I changed the exhaust so it was quieter. But we'd got off on the wrong foot. And since then, he basically used to complain about stuff to us. So we had kids, we had cats, we had a couple of cats that we took in, some strays, and we lived in this big house. So obviously that annoyed him somewhat. One time he was complaining to my wife and he like grabbed her, and I was like, dude, no, don't do that. I almost put his, you know, I was pretty angry at that point. I almost kind of put his head through the window of his car, but didn't touch him. A few weeks after that, one of my daughter's friends was staying over. So there was like, you know, 6 or 7 of us in the house, and we had this like ringing of the doorbell at like 1 a.m. And I went to the door and I opened it, and the guy was standing there in his like, you know, little white vest thing, and he was like, and I was like, what? And he said, your cat is outside. And I looked to the right, to the living room where both our cats were asleep, and I was like, no, it's not. He's like, your cat is outside and it's terrible. I was like, dude, this is not acceptable. So I shut the door, called the police. Police came and they did that thing where, you know, they split you up and they talk to each party. And they talked to us and they talked to him. And at first they weren't sure who the bad guy was, because I think this is very common with police. They kind of try and figure out who's the good guy and who's the bad guy in the situation. But very quickly, this guy made himself into the bad guy by like shouting at the police and being really aggressive. Whereas we were like, you know, we're here sleeping, and this crazy guy came around and started shouting about stuff. So, and that also went quite well, because what the police did was they said, look, we don't want you to talk to this family anymore directly. If you have any kind of problem with noise or anything like that, you need to call us and we will tell them. And since then, he never talked to us after that. So that worked out really, really well. And the last two are a bit more kind of serious, a bit more sad. So while we were living in that big house, there was a apartment block in front of it. And one of the apartments was a mother and a young girl. And we really had the impression that the young girl was being abused, like physically. And so several times I actually went to the apartment and knocked on the door and said, is everything okay? She was crying, and it wasn't normal crying. It was like, yeah, bad crying. And there was like, oh, it's fine, it's fine. And then we called the police a few times, and the police would come round, but it was the same kind of thing. The police would knock on the door and say, is everything okay? And the family would be like, yeah, it's fine. And they moved away after that. And after they'd moved, she was at the same elementary school as one of my daughters. And my wife talked to her teacher and said, yeah, and the teacher also had that kind of impression. And the problem in Japan is when people move, the social services don't always follow them. So all these really tragic stories you see on the news, it's often that the families move. Once they attract the attention of social services, they'll move to a different area and start fresh kind of thing. So really, really sad. And the same, we had another incident in the block where our school is, one of the rental apartments. Lots of kind of shouting and banging and kid crying and stuff. So we called the police on them a couple of times too, but nothing really happened, unfortunately. So the fourth category is being investigated. And just to be clear, it wasn't me being investigated, but my daughters got into trouble with the police a couple of times. And I ended up going to the police station to deal with the police and to get them back, as it were. So that was really interesting. So the first one was one of my daughters was caught shoplifting with her friend from school or whatever. So I had to go into the police station and wait and wait. Anything to do with the police in Japan takes forever. Like, you know, the statement, they type out statements by hand, print them, show them to you. I mean, everything takes forever. So I think I was there for about 5 hours just waiting, and she was there for 5 hours being, you know, interviewed by the police and stuff. So, but we got her back, and I think the shop didn't press charges, which was nice. So we went to the shop, we paid for the items, we apologized, said it wasn't going to happen again. Shop decided not to press charges, so that was the end of that. Second one was my other daughter had her bicycle checked. And she was riding a bicycle that a boy from her school gave her. And he'd stolen it. So those random police checks where they check bicycle registration numbers, sometimes they work. So they found out the bicycle was stolen, took her in and, you know, interrogated her about what happened, went and grabbed the boy, pulled him in as well, and same thing, I went to the police station, waited for a really long time, and eventually got her back. And we went home. So we were like, yeah, don't accept gifts from random boys. So the next category is unwarranted interactions, basically ID checks. And this is, I think it depends where you live. This is more or less common in Japan, where the police will check ID for foreign residents. And the first time I was checked was at Narita Airport, and this is super common at Narita Airport, basically. I actually talked to the police officers, and I learned that they were actually from Hokkaido, weirdly. So I learned that many police officers in Japan are sent to Narita temporarily to do training and to learn how to do various things. And one of those things is dealing with foreigners. So often in Narita, you'll see the police walking around with checkboards and they'll go up to foreign looking people and they'll ask to see their passport or their ID card and so on, and they're basically training that interaction there. They usually won't do it if you're with a Japanese person, so they'll only do it if you're by yourself and you look non-Japanese, or you're with a group of non-Japanese people. And the first time it happened, I kind of grumbled a bit, and then I showed them my ID as requested and we had a little chat and it was fine. Next time was in Sendai Airport. Inside the departure area. So after going through the security check, there was a cop standing there, and he basically just went up to everyone who looked non-Japanese and asked for their ID. And again, I hadn't been in Japan that long at that point, maybe 5 or 6 years in. So I kind of grumbled again. I was like, what are you doing? You don't really have any reason to do this, but I ended up complying and showing him my alien registration card back in the day, before Zaidyu cards. But that felt a bit weird. Apparently he was there all the time. That was his job. He was from a nearby police station, but his job was just to hang out in the airport and ask for ID. And my third ID check, I've had 4, so I had 2 at Narita on separate occasions, and then the first one at Sendai Airport, and then the second one at Sendai Airport. It was just before passport control, which is weird, because surely if you have a problem with your Zaidi card, the passport control officer's gonna notice. That's their job. But yeah, there was a police officer just before passport control, and he stopped me and said, can I see your Zaidi card? And I really pushed back a bit more this time. In a calm and polite and, you know, friendly way. But I was like, why did you actually stop me? He's like, oh, I'm just checking everyone's ID. I'm like, well, no, you're not checking everyone's ID. You're checking my ID. Now, why are you doing that? It's not because I'm white, is it? And he was like, oh, no. I was like, okay, well, if that's the case, then can you check their ID? And I pointed to these two, like, Japanese ladies. And he did. He actually went up and said, can I see your ID? And they're like, no. And they walked off. And then he tried again with this middle-aged guy, and he's like, can I see your ID? And the guy's like, no, and walked off. So I came back to me, and he's like, yeah, very sheepish at this point. And I said, look, I'm not actually going to show you my ID because you don't have any reason to see it. And he was like, okay, can you just show me that you have a Zaidu card without the details? I was like, sure, here it is. And then I left, but that was very interesting to me. This issue is very nuanced, and some people get very annoyed about it, and some people are very dismissive of it as an issue. My take on ID checks. So in Japan, the police and immigration and government officials have the right to ask for your ID, your Zaidu card, while performing their duties. And this is the key part, in my opinion. When it comes to random police checks, if police want to check citizens in Japan, they have something called shokumu shitsumon, which is kind of like official questions, I guess. So it's an official, you're being questioned officially, right? As opposed to being questioned voluntarily, which is the other way that police deal with people, which is they just ask you questions and you don't have to answer. Although most people will because they're polite and they're cooperative with the police and so on. So that's a bit of a grey line. So from my point of view, stopping people randomly on the street because they look white or they look brown or they look black or whatever, or they look, slightly non-Japanese in some way, that doesn't actually clear the criteria for shokumu shitsumon. So the big question is checking ID held to the same standard as shokumu shitsumon? And I kind of think it is. My interpretation of Japanese law is that's actually the case. If you have the right to see ID as part of your work duties, then you have to clear the barrier for it being an official interview. But in practice, the police have a lot of leeway, and if they want to, they can make your life very difficult. So if you're in a hurry, if your Japanese isn't very good, if you're not sure of the kind of legal framework involved here, if you're not able to be very calm and polite with people, don't even mess with this. Just show your ID when asked. It'll be over very quickly and you'll be able to get on with your day. If you're like me and a bit stubborn and so on, then I will sometimes push back. So, if I was not in a hurry, if I was in a crowded place, and if the police seemed reasonable, I would probably try not to show ID for those reasons. My normal kind of script would be like, say hello and be friendly and say, okay, what's this about? So normally the police will come up and say, can I see your Zaidu card? And you don't want to answer that question if you're going to refuse to show. So instead of answering the question, you say, what's this about? And they say, oh, we're checking Zaidu cards. And then I would say, is this shokumu shitsumon? And they'd say no, because they haven't cleared the barrier for that. And then I'd say, well, I'm in a hurry, actually, can I go? And sometimes they'll say, okay, you can go. And sometimes they'll push it. And if they push it, eventually I would show ID. And how long it takes would depend on how the interaction works. If I was in a hurry, if I was trying to get somewhere and I couldn't be late, I would just show ID. And if it was at night or if the police seemed like pissed off, I would just show ID because it's not worth, So you have to be able to gauge the situation. And when this isn't a binary thing, this isn't a black and white thing, it's a very grey thing. So if in doubt, just show ID when asked. The next section is random incidents. So there's quite a few random things that have happened with the police. So the first one, back when I was in ALT, I was walking past the school I worked at night, and there was some people like setting off fireworks and setting fire to things in the school. So I kind of called the police and said, look, there's some people burning stuff in the school. So I don't know what happened after that. They took my name. Normally the police will ask your name if you call them, and you can either choose to give them the name and the contact details or not. Ostensibly, this is so that they can contact you and tell you what happened. In this case, I didn't find out what happened, but I presume it was fine. The school was there the next day, so I presume it wasn't burnt down in the night. Second one was I actually got caught up in a random alcohol check. That's only ever happened once, but I was driving at night and there was a kind of police barricade and I got pulled over and I got breathalyzed. And that was all. So they didn't ask for my ID. They didn't really ask me any questions. I think they said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I'm just going home." And I got breathalyzed. It was fine. And I got to leave. So that took just 5 minutes or so. Another time I found a smartphone on the floor. It had a Suica card in it. It looked like a teenager's phone probably. So I took it to the police, handed it in. And I had to fill in some paperwork. So I had to fill in, my name and so on. And then I had to choose whether I wanted to be given a reward and whether I wanted to be contacted with the results. And I said no. So I don't want a reward and I don't really care what happens with this phone. I'm just giving it to you. But it did take about 15 minutes to do the paperwork and do all that. So just be aware, if you hand in random stuff to the police, they'll probably make you do the paperwork as well. This next one's one of my favorites. So where we live, there's a little bar across the street and they're kind of antisocial. Like they'll do barbecues on the pavement and stuff like that. So there's kind of weird little crowd in there. And one year they were doing karaoke at night in the summer. With the windows wide open, right? And it's only about 20 meters away from our apartment, just across the road, right? So really loud, right? And like just bad, small bar karaoke for hours. So I kind of let it go until 11. So I didn't do anything until 11 o'clock. But at 11 o'clock, I kind of had enough. So I called the police and I called the police station. And often when you have a less urgent complaint or a less urgent issue or something you want to kind of get advice about, it's better to call the police station rather than calling 110, which is the emergency line. And the emergency line normally gets routed to the closest korban, the closest police box, but often the police stations are more helpful. So I called the police station, said, yeah, there's this bar, it's really noisy and stuff, and they're like, okay, we'll send someone round. And 10 minutes later, police car comes up, police go into the bar, everyone leaves the bar's shut. I was like, oh, awesome. That was really, really great. And they've pretty much behaved after that, so haven't had to do it again. On my last trip to Europe, I got to Narita, and I was trying to find the bus to the hotel because I was staying the night before. And I couldn't find it. It was getting close to the time. So I actually went up to two of those police guys with the clipboards in Narita. And I kind of thought they were going to ask me for my ID. This foreigner just dropped into their lap, as it were. But they didn't. They were super nice, super helpful. They found where my bus stop was, took me there. Really friendly, had a good chat, and yeah, they didn't ask for my Zydio card, which was cool. Next one, my wife and I, we found a wallet, went to the police box to hand it in, same kind of deal. She did the paperwork this time, same thing, about 10 minutes in and out. And again, we declined the reward and declined finding out what happened to the wallet. In Japan, if you find something, you're legally entitled to a share of the value of it as a reward for handing it in. So if you find a wallet full of money and you tick that I do want a reward, then the owner would have to give you some of that money as a reward. And that's legally mandated. It's kind of interesting. If the item is not claimed, I believe you get to keep it. So, these people that find huge bags of money and hand them in, assuming that whoever owned that large bag of money doesn't claim it, they would get to keep the bag of money, which is also kind of cool. And the last one was, I live on a main road and we sometimes get those uyoku, the rightist buses coming by, big black buses playing crappy music from the 1940s and waving flags and stuff. And one time I was kind of annoyed, so I called the police. Again, I called the police station, not the box, and I wanted to complain. I was like, who is giving these people permission to drive around like this? And I expected them to be like, yeah, it's, they have permission, don't bother us. But at least on the phone, they were like, oh really? There's a bus driving around? Where is it? We'll go and check it out. And I was like, oh, okay. I wasn't expecting that. But I don't know if they actually did check out the bus, but it was a positive response. So I really recommend calling the police station when you have this kind of complaint rather than the police box, because the police box is going to have, 2 low-level cops just sitting around not really wanting to do anything. Whereas if you call the police station, you end up talking to the people who are in charge of things. So that can normally go a bit better in some cases. So if you're enjoying the video, if you want more videos about life in Japan, about investing, about retirement, about money, please do consider subscribing. It really helps us continue to make these videos. Now, the last section is things that happened to my family that I wasn't involved. So these are not in order, but like one of my daughters moved into a new place, and the downstairs neighbor was a father who was living with his son, and the father is in his 60s, the son's in his 40s, I think, and the son is one of these kind of shut-in types that doesn't go out or interact with anyone. Incredibly noise sensitive. He started complaining every day, leaving little notes in the post box and so on. And even at one point, he wrote a letter ostensibly from the police. It was like, from the police. Please stop making noise and annoying your downstairs neighbor. Signed, the police. It was kind of funny, but also kind of scary. So we ended up getting a lawyer involved. So we hired a lawyer, and we got the lawyer to write letters to the family underneath saying, look, you're just harassing us at this point. Your claims have no merit, and so on. And eventually, I think the father got those letters, and the situation was kind of sorted out for now. But that's pretty scary. You don't want to have unhinged neighbors, because sometimes that goes very wrong. Another incident, another one of my daughters, when she was in high school, she used to go to school by bus, and one day someone groped her on the bus, and she pulled him off the bus and took him to the police box. And I think he was cautioned rather than prosecuted. But I was like, wow, respect. Well done for actively doing that. Before I met my wife, she had 2 kind of police interactions that were very unsatisfactory. So the first one was, she was divorced at this point, single mother with 3 kids. And basically, the boy next door broke into her mansion, so climbed through the balcony and through an open window, and stole a bunch of games, like Nintendo games, I think. Called the police, and the police came round, did an investigation, found the culprit, and then basically pressured my wife into not doing anything. So they basically said, because he lives next door, it could be dangerous for you to press charges, so you shouldn't press charges because we wouldn't be able to help you if something happened to you or your children. And she was very, very frustrated by that, and she ended up not pressing charges. The family didn't return the stolen items because they'd already been sold or given away. And ended up just giving her a small amount of money that didn't come close to covering the damage and so on. So she was very frustrated by that. Another incident was when another of my daughters was in junior high school. She was beaten up by some of the older girls who stole her money. And for that situation, it was handled okay, I think. So they called the police and the school dealt with it, and it didn't happen again. So all of my interactions with the police in Japan so far have been either positive or neutral. I do have quite serious concerns about the legal system here, about the hostage justice thing, about the lack of oversight on the police, and so on. But personally, so far, everything has been pretty much okay. I'm pretty satisfied with the police responses I've had, the interactions I've had with the police. I do think where you live is going to make a big difference. So for example, the police in Sendai are going to be very different to the police in Tokyo or Osaka or other areas in Japan, so I can't talk for everyone here. And your perceived status will also make a big difference. I've been lucky in that most of the time I've been living here, I've had a job that has a fairly high status. So I was either working in the local government, in the Kencho here in Miyagi, or I was working in a university, a national university that was quite high prestige. So actually the few times when the police have pulled me over, they've been like, they ask where you work, and I tell them, and their attitude would change completely. So I'd be like, oh, are they like the guys that pulled me over for the smartphone thing when I was calling my friend quickly while driving. Once I told them where I worked, they started calling me sensei because I worked at the national university in the city. So so that is, I think actually that's kind of unfortunate in that, you know, if your perceived status is high, you'll be treated differently to someone whose perceived status is low as well. One of the most important things when dealing with the police is to be polite and calm, to just remain really calm, really chilled and polite, and things will go better for you. And being slightly friendly as well. In any situation, the police basically are trying to figure out who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. And if you are friendly and relaxed and calm, you are much more likely to be deemed the good guy in the situation. Speaking decent Japanese is going to really help you when dealing with the police. Some police officers speak English, but not very much and not very many. And I know people that pull the, you know, I don't speak Japanese card to try and get out of stuff. I wouldn't do that. If you don't speak Japanese and you don't understand what's going on, then I would recommend generally just complying with stuff. So if someone asks for your ID and you don't speak Japanese, you don't understand the situation, just show them your ID. Yeah. You can really get yourself into trouble by misunderstanding things. So just be chilled and cooperate in general. So how about you? What are your experiences dealing with the police in Japan? If you've got any comments or stories or questions, please stick them in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.